Doctors with disabilities exist in small but measurable numbers. How did they navigate their journey? What were the challenges? What are the benefits to patients and to their peers? What can we learn from their experiences? My name is Lisa Meeks, and I'm thrilled to bring you the Docs with Disabilities podcast. Join me as I interview docs, nurses, psychologists, OTs, PTs, pharmacists, dentists, and the list goes on. I'll also be interviewing the researchers and policymakers that ensure medicine remains an equal opportunity profession.
Hello and welcome back to the Docs with Disabilities podcast. Today we are joined by a very special guest, New York Times bestselling author, pediatrician, and Boston Children's Pediatric Simulation Center director, Dr. Jennifer Arnold. In this episode, Dr. Meeks and Dr. Arnold discuss the elevated standards placed on disabled students, the role disabled physicians play in empowering their patients, and the value of disability education in healthcare. We begin with an introduction by Dr. Meeks and Dr. Arnold.
I love how we met. I love how we clicked. I love how we laughed a lot on the sidelines of kind of bringing things together. But why don't you introduce yourself for the audience?
Yes. So my name is Jennifer Arnold. I am a neonatologist clinically. I am a healthcare simulationista, I like to call it. So I've, pretty much dedicated my career, my academic career, to healthcare simulation as a safety tool and an educational tool. And then I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a person with a disability. I have a type of skeletal dysplasia called spondyloepiphyseal dysplasia type strudwick, which is I think one of the rarer types. Well, actually, no, it's one of the rarer types. And I'd like to think of myself as a disability advocate and, any opportunity I can, to fit it into my crazy life.
But it's a beautiful life. It's such a rich life.
Thank you. I feel like it has been. It definitely has. I'm a little exhausted, but I think I like to be tired. So that's my happy place, I guess.
We share what I almost feel like I have to keep as a secret, but I love what I do. I get out of bed every morning at 4:30, 5 o'clock, and I'm so excited to get to the work. I'm lucky. And you get to shatter stereotypes pretty much every day.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I don't even think about it, but that's a good goal. Yes. If I can do that, then yes, then it's a good day. Well, I feel the same about you and your work. Like the fact that you love your work and the fact that you're making such a difference for so many. Like when I first met you, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to be like Lisa. Like I want to be Lisa. She's just doing all the things that I've only dreamed about, making a difference in this way, never knowing that there is a path forward to affecting change in such a deliberate and scholarly way that you're doing.
So tell us about your day, a day in the life of Jen Arnold. What does it really look like? Pull back the curtain. And by the way, this podcast episode is already nothing like any other episode we've ever done.
We're just having a conversation. We're going with the flow. Yeah. So what's a day in the life like for me? Well, right now it's very different than maybe it was when I was, at different stages in life, right? Like I'm sure we all feel that way. Like my day in the life is very different than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. But I feel like, I'm not a morning person like I hear you are. I wish I was. I am not. I hit the snooze button a couple times and then I get up and because I'm a little bit of a glutton for punishment, we have 2 new puppies, get out of their crate from bedtime as humanly quickly as possible outside so that they don't hopefully have not had an accident in their crate because we're in that, training stage here. And then I get a cup of coffee because that's really the first thing I do. And then depending on where my husband is at with waking up, I'm either waking up children or he's waking up children and showering, and I'm typically trying to get out the door because I now have a long commute, which I hate.
So you're at Boston Children's Hospital, which is how we met. And you have a long commute because Boston is known for having no traffic and nice people, no horns.
No, none of that.
No, none of that. Do you take the train in or do you drive?
No, because I want to hear a funny story about the train relates to our topic. So, well, one is probably the most important reason I don't take the train is because I imagine once I land close to the hospital, it's still a significant walk to get to where I work. And if you're carrying a laptop or anything else, that's really what kills me in terms of distance. I mean, there still is a finite limitation for distance for me, but like that's a problem. But the other reason is that the location, the train station near my house, because I live in Natick, is not actually accessible. Can you believe it in this day and age? Yeah.
Natick train station is not accessible. We're just going to say that out loud.
Supposedly they're working on it, but they've been working on it since I first interviewed, or since I came to visit in 2019 or something. So to drive in, it's a good hour, depending on the time of day. I leave an hour to an hour and 15, but technically it's only like 15 miles. But yeah.
Wow. Do you listen to anything? Like, do you have a morning routine in the car? Do you take phone calls? When I commute from Ann Arbor, I'll plan meetings, like phone meetings, so that it makes the time go by.
It does. I do a lot of Zoom meetings because especially since I'm notoriously late. So it's perfect to be able to do the Zoom. I just do the audio Zoom, obviously, while driving. I definitely take calls. Sometimes I listen to the news. It's really my only time that I can keep up with what's going on in the world, at least peripherally. And then other times I listen to podcasts. So like this.
Can you imagine somebody turning on this episode expecting like the very, traditional and going, what is happening? What is happening on this Friday morning with these two women that are just having this random conversation?
Yes.
So you get to work and you get to play in what I call the sandbox. I love sim. I think sim is a playground for innovation. I think it's a playground for access because you get to try different ways of meeting that competency, getting to that procedure in a safe and effective and hopefully supportive environment. But I've been using sim for years. I would love to have my own lab with all kinds of like ergonomic equipment and equipment for arthritis, which I often will translate for people that have joint issues. But I would just love to have, if I win the lottery, maybe I'll do that.
And we should talk more about how to incorporate that because, to be honest, even though I have been involved in simulation for years, I've never done that application of simulation, but it makes all the sense in the world.
All the sense in the world.
And we should totally be doing it. So
we should. Yeah. Jim Cook let me play around at Michigan. He's such a great guy. And then we wrote a chapter together on how sim has potential benefit for disability inclusion. But then the world shut down.
Yeah.
The world shut down. And I actually think that's a fundable project. Like, I really think that the majority of things that we're afraid of, we could address in this safe way and then, write it up, disseminate it. This is how you do it. Come up with best practice for clinical accommodation. Yeah.
I think we have a project to work on together.
Like all underrepresented groups in medicine, disabled students often face the additional pressure to overachieve in order to prove that they belong in healthcare.
It's funny you say that for so many years, and I hear this from lots of people that it's kind of this head down, forward motion, achieve beyond anyone because the assumptions and the expectations are so low. The assumptions are that I will not be able to do this and the expectations are so low that I have to overshoot the target. So I think people, whether there's an apparent or non-apparent disability, people have these kind of taxes that they carry almost as they navigate the space. And this and these different types of assumptions, but basically what's driving it is fear. So tell me about when you went to medical school. I know the story of your experience applying to medical school, because I think that leads nicely into the assumptions, the kind of the perceptions of what you could and could not do, and the assumptions around what you would need to be able to engage.
When I applied to medical school, I basically got rejected from everywhere. I mean, to put like what is a longer story short, I ended up putting in my personal statement about my disability and why I wanted to go into medicine. And it was essentially to give back. And, I'd had so many surgeries by an amazing surgeon who dedicated his whole life to caring for individuals with skeletal dysplasia like myself. It's funny because even until more recently, I wouldn't even commit to say that it was because of my disability that I didn't get any interviews. Or the 2 interviews that I got out of, one of them, the way I was interviewed, it probably had all the impact in the world because, I had gotten a lot of secondary applications based on my initial grades and, and whatnot. And I'm not saying I was like super brilliant, smart. No, I was just a hard worker. But I think I had similar grades and whatnot as my classmates who, were also applying. And long story short, my first interview, the surgeon that interviewed me was just, asking me about, how do I drive a car and how do I expect to see patients and how could I crack open the chest of a MBA victim that comes in through the ER. And again, as a college student, I don't know that any college student would know how to answer those questions, but clearly I knew why he was asking those questions. He was worried about my physicality and my ability to do the work. I felt like I spent an hour in that interview defending my interest in becoming a physician. I didn't know for sure if I'd be able to do it all, but I definitely knew that I wasn't going into medicine to put anybody at risk. And I was going back into medicine because I felt like I had something to offer and I knew this is the career that I wanted to pursue. And so, my next interview was very different, to be honest. It was not at all like that. And I ended up, getting into both schools in the end. I think that helped to set me up for a lot of worry going to medical school. But I'm also kind of like one of those people that at some level, when you tell me I can't do something, it makes me want to do it more. And that's probably something I'm guessing you've heard as well in some of these podcasts and so or conversations. And so, I went to my dream school. Those were 4 really tough years. So I didn't know that there were any other little people as doctors when I was applying. But when I got to Hopkins, I found out that there was a pediatric orthopedic surgeon who had skeletal dysplasia. He has achondroplasia. And as soon as I found out about him, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to meet him. And so I picked my surgical elective, years later during med school to be on his team and whatnot, just to see how he operated. And, to be honest, I remember at a function in my third year, I was telling him about, it was a code and I was the sub-I and I had to respond to a code and the elevators, no one took the elevators because it could take too long to respond to a code, but I had to go down 9 flights of stairs. And I remember that I did that. And because I was the sub-I, I'm not gonna not show up to this code because then people are gonna wonder if I'm gonna be capable of being a resident, right? And where I'm even more responsible. So I did it, and I'm gonna tell you, I paid for it for the next week. And I remember sharing this example with him, and I said, "How did you do it?" And he was like, "Oh, you have to just run." He's like, "You have to be better than everybody else around you, in order to do it. Otherwise, you won't survive."
And I think that's the same for every marginalized group. I think that, trainees that are Black and brown, trainees that are LGBTQ and out, I think they feel that same pressure of everyone is going to think I don't belong here and therefore I'm going to overextend myself, right? Or for those that have non-apparent disabilities, just being the high achiever so that if something happens, if someone finds out, there won't be this huge jump to, oh, well, now it makes sense, right?
Exactly.
They can't excel. It's so interesting. The fear is so real. It's so real.
Exactly. You have to be it's like, because it's almost like this feeling like you already have this, when you walk in the room, preconceived notions and concerns. Can you do this? Blah, blah, blah. You have to outshine everybody else, not because you're competitive, in order to make it. It's a very interesting dialogue that goes on in our heads.
So what did you actually wind up needing in medical school, accommodation wise?
Well, I already had a scooter that I used for long distance, right? Just to get around. So that wasn't something that they had to provide. And I needed a double step stool, which, to be honest, I bought myself.
Yeah.
And I bungee corded it to my scooter. So I always had it with me. That was pretty much it in medical school. I will say, in surgery, I will say that needed the sterile gowns. Thankfully, where I was at, they didn't use the throwaways. They used the reusable ones. And because, this other surgeon was there, who's a little person, I got to use his, which were big on me, but they still worked better than the average size one. I used regular gloves. I just would, get them a sort of the smallest size, and then, modify the fingers, like push the fingers down, and it still gave me enough dexterity. Again, as a med student, you're mostly retracting and learning and watching. And so I'll tell you another funny story. I knew I wasn't going to become a surgeon. I thought about it, but then I did think, okay, physicality, that's going to be pretty tough. So I didn't choose surgical fields, but, you have to go through that initial rotation. So I picked oncology and endocrinology, surgery. So it wasn't like trauma, after my interview, I was like, no way I'm doing that. And so I ended up in hopefully a little less, physically challenging field. But nonetheless, I didn't think about the fact that thyroid surgeries, they do them with the patient sitting upright. And as a med student, your job is to retract the thyroid above the neck with this tiny little retractor. Heck, if I wasn't going to do it, and I will say, kudos to the surgeon. He had no problem with me doing this. I literally took, I think, 2 or 3 Baker steps. And I, again, this is the other thing that I'm guessing is, as a person with a disability medicine, you learn to be really nice to everybody around you, because, it does take a little bit of a village. And so the nursing staff were really great about allowing me to stack up the Baker steps. And then I put my double step stool on top of that. And then we covered it with a sterile drape so that as I climbed up, I was maintaining sterility, right? So I would get all sterile, and then I would carefully climb up. And then I was like this with my hand up in the air, retracting the neck for this thyroid patient. And I remember at one point, feeling like I'm going to drop this retractor in the middle of the surgery. And so I'm like, I can't believe I did this, right? I'm pretty high up, perched, holding this retractor. And, of course I'm doing it, right? It was great. And, but then my arm was getting tired, and I was like, God, what do I do? Do I interrupt? Do I say something? I'm like, I don't want to drop the retractor in the middle of the surgery. And so finally I'm like, okay, I don't want to accidentally drop the thing. So I said to Dr. Udelsman, I just want to say my hand's getting really tired. I might need to switch hands. He was like, no. He's like, you're perfect where you are. Stay right there. Do not move. And I was like, and I'm like, every single mite of strength in me. And I did it. I didn't drop the retractor. I mean, maybe I wasn't the first med student to say that, but, yeah, that's med school in a nutshell.
It's not rocket science.
No.
I told you about the student where I was consulting, and the student who was your biggest fan went into medicine because of you, and had a similar trajectory with multiple surgeries as a child. And that was kind of what led her to medicine. But knowing that you were a physician is what gave her the kind of, in some ways, audacity, right, to move forward and say, I'm going to enter medicine. And yet there's a big difference between medical students now and when we were in school. And she is like the same question. And this is during OSCEs or during her surgical rotation. And the school is calling me, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I'm like, go down to the local Walmart.
Yep.
Buy yourself a $10 step stool. But I think, again, that fear is very real. It's very real when people are outside of this discussion. They don't want to do anything wrong. They really wanted to make sure the student felt supported, but they were overcomplicating a non-complicated issue.
Yeah.
And, perhaps they thought that if they suggested just a Walmart step stool, it would be reducing the need or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. Then when I went to residency, they just bought a bunch of the Walmart step stools and put them all over the hospital for me. It was great,
Walmart is not paying for this podcast. I just want to make that.
Yeah.
But
yes,
if they want to, they can.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, so they just bought step stools and it wasn't an issue.
Yeah, they just put them all around the place. I mean, that was fabulous. And to be honest, in residency, I will say that they were extraordinarily proactive. At Pittsburgh,
We love Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it's great.
So many good people came out of Pittsburgh. So many good
Yes.
people are still there. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I 100% agree. And I love Pittsburgh. And so I did my residency and fellowship there. And they were just, amazing. Like amazing.
Let's switch gears and hear from Dr. Arnold about the supportive teams she worked with throughout her education.
As soon as I matched, I got a call literally on a Saturday morning after the match from the program director, Dina Hofkosh, who's an amazing woman. And she just said, hey, so excited you're going to be part of our, residency, blah, 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 blah. Just wanted to say congratulations. And maybe we can set up a time to talk and figure out, what things we can do to help you prepared for anything you might need. Just no big deal, but definitely proactive. And you could tell it was invested in me and just making sure I could function and do everything I needed to do to learn. And that's was
awesome.
Great.
That's awesome. Were you afraid of the match? Were you afraid when you were going through it that you would experience the same kind of BS that you experienced applying to medical school?
I was a little worried. My interviews there weren't as bad. I think it helped that you'd already made it through med school.
And confidence, no less.
Yeah, exactly. I think that honestly helped. So I got a lot of interviews, but I did get some questions in my interviews about how I was going to function and whatnot. But at least I had had some experience, I think, doing that in med school and how it was to see patients and whatnot. And at that point too, I was picking, a field that, I wasn't picking trauma surgery. Let's just say it, leave it at that. Pediatrics, while it can be very physically demanding as well, it's just, it's a little bit different. So, yeah. So, and there's a lot of subspecialties within pediatrics too,
Yep.
right? So I ended up not having as big of a problem, but the match, I was actually very worried. I knew I had matched. I think they tell you if you don't match. So at least I knew I had matched. And I remember when I interviewed too for residency positions, I was extraordinarily thoughtful about the physicality of the space when we do the tours,
Yeah.
I went to Duke, no harm Duke. I don't know if I should say this, but the one thing that I remember about Duke was from a physicality is that they had all the patient charts. They probably don't do this anymore because now we're all EMR, but they had the patient charts in the wall in this cupboard that went flipped up and down. And I thought, oh my God, what a pain. I'm going to have to take my step stool, climb up, pull it down, then move the step stool back, and then climb up to actually look at the chart. And that's going to be a 3-step process for every patient. So from a logistics, I was like, I don't want to deal with that. So I didn't rank them very high just because of that alone. I was like, yeah, no. I mean, could I do it? Yes. But I was thinking residency, I'm going to be really busy. I'm going to have to see all these patients and be quick. And yeah, I was like, that can't happen.
Honestly, they could have just lowered it.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
would they do that back then? Now I would tell somebody, you just need to lower this. It's going to be accessible for everybody, right? It's not a big deal.
But back then I would have thought it was just for me. And I think they would have looked at it like that as well.
Oh, yeah.
And then that would have been too much of a burden from my perspective on other people who would have had to have it lower.
Yeah. So what was it about Pittsburgh that you were like, yes?
Well, I think when I went there, I could tell that they were just happy. You know what I mean? I know that sounds silly, but
They're not happy. What are you talking about?
I know. But they seemed so just engaging. And I remember when you met with them, the tours are very nice. And they seem very much, I don't know how to describe it. Probably not words that are appropriate, but how you might think of meeting your pediatrician, like growing up, like someone that you just trusted and that cared, like patient first, like cared for you as an individual before it's all about the science and all about the blah, blah, blah. Not that they weren't doing research, and they were very scholarly, but they just seemed like they had more balance. And I felt that that was going to be a better environment.
Truly, so many leaders have come out of Pittsburgh. It's pretty amazing to watch in medical education when you think about lineage, how many people were there. And people love it, that when they talk about it, they love it. And the people who are still there are great.
It's funny that you said that, because like I almost stayed there if I hadn't met my husband and we were, in fellowship, and I took my first job to be near him in New York, and I thought very hard about staying. Like,
yeah.
It's a good place. I still keep in touch with so many people.
Yeah. So you followed a man to New York. That's the next part of your story.
Yes, I did. We dated long distance until I graduated from Pittsburgh, but then I took my first job. I was thinking about staying as an attending in Pittsburgh, and then because they had simulation, which I'd already gotten involved in. They have one of the best simulation programs. I love the NICU team there. It was family in Pittsburgh for me.
That's amazing. When disability kind of just dissolves into the landscape, you don't have to explain it. You don't have to think about it. You have your people. Nobody's questioning you. Did you ever stop and think, oh my gosh, I've got to go through all of this again? Like I have to prove myself again.
Yes. And I find myself doing that way more than I ever thought I would. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, here we go again. No. I did think about that a lot. And when I first started at Stony Brook, which is where I went to work with my husband, I was really worried about that, because now I am a new attending. So you have all this trepidation of being an attending by yourself. And then on top of it, you have a disability. And so you have a whole new, group of nurses and patients and staff and everybody to prove yourself. But I think I did okay in the end. You know what I mean? The first couple of months, like, when you wake up and you have that pit in your stomach, like, oh my God, am I going to do okay?
It is exhausting.
Yeah.
So often, though, the reality of what happens isn't as bad as what you're nervous about, right? So It sounds like it wasn't as bad.
No, it wasn't as bad. I will say that, I'd interviewed with the chief of neonatology there, and she was wonderful. Just a wonderful human being, and I think that helped. There's something about the leadership that I typically choose, based on like just seemingly like really good people.
It's just a vibe.
It's a vibe. Yeah, thank you. It's a vibe that this is going to be okay. Yeah. Like, they take me for who I am.
Yeah.
They're not seeing the disability first. They're not seeing she's a little person first, and can she do this? There's not that awkwardness. It's like we're just two people.
Yeah. That's nice when that happens.
Yeah, it is.
Clinicians with disabilities have unique experiences that help them better relate to a diverse group of patients. Let's see how Dr. Arnold's disability helped her in clinical settings.
My whole theory is that just by being in the room, you have enacted change. You have caused ripple effects. And we know this, whether you know it or not, although I assume you do get lots and lots and lots of fan mail. But, but how do kids respond to you?
Kids have been really quite fabulous. I will say that early on, I didn't think about it this way. Having a disability, I grow up around kids, and they can be all across the board. But in general, they're just usually fascinated and have questions and like move on, right? It never occurred to me to be worried about how patients would react to me. But other people have been worried for me. So this is what I used to say in my ER time, right? So I almost went into emergency medicine. I did love pediatric emergency medicine. I would go in and the kid would be crying in the room. You're coming in to do your assessment and figure out what's going on. And then they would see me and they would just like kind of shut up. like no joke, hands down. Like it didn't matter what was going on. They were like, and it was kind of a secret weapon because then I could get an exam out of them. So sometimes I would just get a few questions in. I'd be like, do you mind if I examine your kid first? And then we're going to talk more. Only because that was like a sweet spot time that I had to get a cooperative child to not be like freaking out and crying. Right. And to be honest, most of the time I I don't know, maybe they were less intimidated. I don't know. Like sometimes they had questions. Why are you so little? Or you're a doctor? And like, yes. And then they'd be like, okay, like I don't have any bad memories,
Yeah.
of in my interactions with kids, all positive. And if anything, super fun.
I find that from most people, but the program directors worry, right? The medical school folks worry, how are patients going to react? I'm like, patients are going to be so happy. They're going to presume this person's going to listen to them. They're going to presume this person has experience with the healthcare system. I really think people respond quite positively. I've said publicly many times, I would choose a disabled physician, hands down, any specialty.
Yep.
If they've had that experience in any way, shape, or form, they are just more empathic, more understanding about how scared you might be.
Especially if you want them to actually be able to empower themselves to take good care of their health and to follow up with whatever your recommendations are. Like, we think about compliance and yeah, I know it's funny how that happens a lot. Yeah, you got me kind of thinking about just a recent experience I had. So I actually had, I think for the first time that, to my awareness at least, someone with a visible disability to be my physician.
Ooh.
And in all of the years that I've been a patient and a doctor, I've never personally had someone be my physician with a disability that was visible. To be honest, it was really cool. And for a moment I thought, oh, wouldn't it be even cooler if they were a little person too? Because then they would totally get my life. Because the topics we were talking about were really related to my disability.
Yeah.
It's such a reassuring feel that you're like, okay, I don't have to explain everything to you and wonder if you actually are hearing me. I know that, like, it's just this comfort that, like, they're listening and they get it. Even if they don't know my exact experience with my disability, they have a disability, they've had a similar lived experience, and they're paying attention. And, many times he said to me, he's like, I don't have exactly the same disability as you, but, this is what I'm hearing. And they're a little just more careful to be really clear that what the messages I'm sharing, they understand.
Yeah. Well, and also not to make everything about your disability, I would imagine.
Oh, totally. 100%. Yes.
That's the best part, is like, you're not all of a sudden clinicalized or reduced to this one diagnosis. And, yes, I'm having this, whatever this symptom is, but it may actually have nothing to do with my disability. I'm also a person.
Yes. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad you had that experience.
Yeah. And I think more people would love to have that experience. And the only way they'll be able to have that experience is to have more individuals with disabilities in healthcare.
But we're going to do that. And we're going to build this amazing centralized sim center where people can call in and go, what do we do? And we'll go, don't worry. Here's what you do.
Exactly.
This is what you do.
Exactly.
The thing that is so nice, I think, too, is just to have your disability not be a big deal. Like when the physician comes in the room, you don't have to center everything around the fact that that I have a disability. Oh, and also, right?
Yes.
Like, you're looking at a system that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. These do not interact.
Yep.
It's not an issue. And I think for me, especially, some of my students went into some fields that are closely related to my disability. And I have to say, just knowing them as people, I would go to them before I would go to anybody else. Like, it's just so reassuring, to have that.
Well, and sometimes I think too, I don't know if others have felt this way, but like when you go as a patient and you have a disability, the physician does not have a disability, or just, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like they miss a lot of things that are not related to your disability. So like, it's almost like everything, it clouds it, or they're hyper focused on it. And like you said, you're there for other reasons, right? Like, I need to know that my cholesterol is okay. Has nothing to do with my disability. Please don't forget to order me my cholesterol test because you're so focused on the things related to my disability, which again, I get, like, they probably have to use more brain. I'm thinking about myself, like, if it's not something they're used to dealing with, they're probably on a high cognitive load trying to think about how to care for that piece.
And watch everything they say.
Yes.
They don't know how to talk all of a sudden. It's like,
that too. Yes.
okay.
Yes.
It's okay. We can talk.
we're conditioned. It's okay. Yes, it's okay. Just, but yeah, because they're processing all of that, and then they forget the basics. You know what I mean? And it's like, and then I walk out and leave. I'm like, oh crap! I forgot to get the order for this. Like, I need to have my cholesterol taken care of because I don't want to die of a heart attack at 50 because I keep failing to take care of like the basic needs.
So you have these good interactions with patients and the parents are probably just in awe of the impact you're having on their child at the moment. Inviting you over for dinner.
Yeah, that has happened. Yes. That has happened, even pre-television show. Yes, I will say that I've always had a pretty good relationship with my parents. Some cases, I walked in and I probably got, it probably took them a minute, like a double take or something, but I very clearly introduced myself as Dr. Arnold and, I'm their baby's doctor and, and I think for me, probably part of the reason I picked a specialty, I think where it's like critical care, because I felt like I could really make a difference when a patient really needed help. And B, I felt like that was a time when patients and families are not going to be too critical of you and the things that they see up front because you're here to save their child's life. Like that's their priority. And so it quickly, I think it just kind of it helps to overcome those potential issues much more quickly, because even for the brief moment that they're like, she's my doctor, but then they're like, okay, so what's going on with her? You know what I mean? Like we're going right to business because their child is critically ill. So I don't know if that, is something you've heard before, but.
No, and I'm curious, how much of that drove your decision about your subspecialty, because it does minimize your disability as being the center of the conversation.
It's funny, like even the decision to do the television show, I think part of it that's made doing it easier is that, because a lot of people will ask me, like, isn't it hard if like you have cameras and everyone looking at you and everyone knowing you? And I'm like, that's been my whole life. Like, I can't leave the front door and not have people looking, staring, maybe taking pictures, coming up to me, strangers asking me questions like, can I have children? And like, like some things that are really personal. Like
that is so inappropriate.
Yeah. Like that's probably the number one question I get asked. And why are you so small? You know what I mean? Like, just like, are you a grown up? Or like, you know what I mean? Like, just, can you have babies? Like, oh my God, like that was my whole life. And like, and then your whole community knows you immediately. Everyone in your school knows you. Everyone knows you if they've had any interaction with you, pre-social media. Right. So like, I feel like you're right. Like my physical disability becomes the first thing and the focus in all of my interactions. And I think that probably did somewhat influence, because here, like, it can't be the focus for very long, if it is at all. Like, we're dealing with much more important things here.
Education has always been a cornerstone of Dr. Arnold's advocacy work. Join us as we examine the importance of teaching people about disability.
So we're going to have to talk about the TV show.
Yes, I brought it up. It's okay. Happy to talk.
I wasn't gonna go there, but now I'm gonna go there.
Yes.
So for those that don't know, why don't you give some background on that?
Yeah. So my husband and I have had a television show called The Little Couple, which is on TLC from about 2009 until 2019. So just not that long ago, it ended. It followed our lives from, being newlyweds to careers and everyday life, and then going through fertility, trying to figure out how we were going to be, build a family. We wanted to become parents, and then international adoption, and then my cancer journey, parenting, all of those things, all of the things in life. So yeah, long time.
And do you think that through the TV show, your position as a physician also helped to break down stereotypes? I know that's how my medical student found out about you. Yeah. And, I mean, they literally aspired to go become a physician because of that.
Oh my gosh. Well, that makes me very happy and humbled at the same time that that would happen. Um, I definitely think that that was my hope, at least, that, by agreeing to do the television show, that it would help people to see that you can do anything. Good Morning America was doing a segment on women with skeletal dysplasias who had careers, I guess is what they said, like professional careers. And they contacted Little People of America, which is a national support group. They reached out to me and they covered me and another woman. And it was actually a little bit of a dichotomy show. A woman that, was wanting to be a professional like singer, and she was having to take a lot of roles like in Las Vegas. And then they made it a dichotomy with myself as a physician, which wasn't the intention at all. But long story short, in that piece, that's how we got sort of quote unquote found by a production company, and they approached us. And we actually turned them down for a year because I was really worried about sensationalism.
Yeah.
And my parents kind of raised me to be really hyper vigilant about that. And so, I didn't want to take anything on that would jeopardize our careers, my husband or myself, that would also perpetuate stereotypes within little people. Voyeurism, all of the sort of the circus type of historical background that, we've, as a group of individuals with a disability, we've had to try to minimize. And so, but then after a year of saying no, they were very persistent. And I think we've decided to take the leap for many reasons, but the leap. And so we've been very careful throughout the show to try to minimize any push that they might have for sensationalizing us as little people.
And I appreciate that so much, because I fear, even when, when people are trying to be inclusive, but in their actions to be inclusive, they're actually making it more about themselves and what a good person they are and what a good program they are. And look at the student that we accepted, and the student winds up on all of the, say, posters, for the institution or for the medical school. And that concerns me when I've talked to people who have been asked to give talks during October or to give a talk about being a disabled medical student. One of the things, if they're a mentee of mine or a former student of mine, that I will say is make sure you're getting to talk about what you want to talk about, that you're not just being put out for this kind of show. So often, if you are minoritized for any reason, you also then bear the burden of
educating the public,
educating the population. And it's like, this is just one more, we cannot continue to say, okay, well, yes, the system needs to be fixed. Thank you so much. How do you propose we do that? Which people do to medical students with disabilities all the time. And I'm like, be careful, because you will wind up writing an entire policy and procedure, pamphlet. It's hard for those students because they don't want other people to go through what they've gone through.
Exactly.
They have been treated so poorly, or they've had so many barriers in place. They've been harassed, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. And then they get burdened with the solution. Okay, fix it for us. And oftentimes it is, I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through. And I want the school to also accept other disabled students. So I'm going to create, the utopia so that can happen. And that first generation of students with disabilities that really came through, that weren't like the one-offs, but I think it was 1,200 students. I think those students carried the largest burden for everyone that came after them, right? There was this need to be perfect. There was this need to overperform, to create policies. Some students left medical school pretty traumatized, with medical schools saying, oh, look what we've done. We've fixed the system. The kind of 4 or 5 learners who are leaving really having had really bad experiences. So
that breaks my heart.
It's tough.
I find myself offering too, right? I think I was of probably the earlier generation. There wasn't a lot of us, so I was just probably head down trying to make it work. It's interesting that you say that. And then the next sort of generation that it grew, the numbers, and then they have the responsibility of trying to make the system better.
Yeah.
That's a big burden.
It is a big burden. So if you're part of that generation and you're listening, you're now all attendings. Thank you for that hard work. But also, that shouldn't have been put on you.
Next, let's hear from Dr. Arnold and Dr. Meeks about the power of both simulation and personal narrative as tools for preparing both disabled and abled practitioners to better care for their patients.
We have to switch gears to a happier conversation. Let's go to the playground.
Oh, yeah.
And tell me about what you get to do every day, and I'll dream about what we're going to create. But tell us why sim is so important in education.
Yeah, I mean, simulation is so important in all of healthcare and education specifically because it's really the best way to learn. I mean, number one, the literature shows that you can learn skills more quickly, you can retain them longer, and it provides opportunities to practice in a safe environment. You're not practicing on real patients, which is the traditional method of how medical schools have, grown up with the apprenticeship model, the see one, do one, teach one. Simulation provides that opportunity to really give new learners the skills in a safe way. Also, you can make as many mistakes as you like or need. In fact, I tell people when they come to the sim lab, I want you to make as many mistakes today as you possibly can, because every mistake that you make is one that you're going to explore how to prevent in the future. And then you're going to prevent that same mistake from happening in the real world. And it's just, it's such a good place to experiment and to grow. And, as adult learners, we learn best through our mistakes. So why not make them in simulation as opposed to in real life on real patients, right? Because everyone's well-intended and well-trained and caring and competent. It's just a matter of having enough opportunity to practice and hone your skills. And that's what makes simulation a great patient safety tool, because it really can decrease, medical errors, preventable harm. It's also a great tool for innovation. It's a great tool for research. It's a great tool for, patient safety in terms of, we run simulations in the hospital setting just to uncover hazards and latent safety threats related to design of spaces, or, how we developed a workflow, or do we have enough people to respond to a massive hemorrhage situation? And do we have all the right roles? And is any one person overtaxed, with too much of a cognitive load that they can't complete it all efficiently? So sort of just everything, thinking about, trying to have hospitals work like a pit crew, because there's so many different people working together to care for patients. And it's a complicated system that you need that ability to rehearse and to identify the problems in a simulated environment.
Absolutely. For me, the biggest parts are innovation and accommodation, right? To figure out to do the same procedure or the same skill, but perhaps differently. But also, I think it is a way to level assessment and to standardize assessment so we reduce bias. And so that is one way that I'm really interested in looking at it, especially around disabled students and how they get assessed on skills. But importantly, even during COVID, it provided clinical experience for students who otherwise would not have been able to get into the hospital and get that. And then importantly, just because the topic is disability, it gave us the ability to engage people that were more at risk during COVID, could continue their training, right? And then circle back to anything that needed to absolutely be checked off with a live patient. But I've used simulation a lot with students that are wheelchair users that have varied levels of hand functioning. And so we'll go into the simulation lab and look at how we can do things, taping the joints, bringing the OTs in, who are some of my favorite people on earth.
Yes.
That creativity, just figuring out what can the actual learner do and then what needs to be directed or perform differently. But yeah, I love it.
I'm glad that you do that. And I'm just telling you that I had not even thought about that. And I've been in my current institution trying to think about how we can expand. There's a lot of interest in simulation from a DEI perspective, but again, we're not talking about the A. And I think you've just given me a ton of great ideas about things that we could be doing to move the needle.
Yeah, I'll come up to Beantown. We'll figure it out. I would love that. I get so excited when I talk about the actual impact that simulation could have in this space, especially running through different types of accommodations for different types of physical disabilities and different ways of doing procedures, and then operationalizing and disseminating that out into the literature.
Yes.
I think that would be an amazing benefit for medical education, because everyone is doing this in a one-off scenario. I mean, there's not a week that goes by that somebody doesn't call and say, I've got this learner, we're not really sure how we're going to do this.
Yes.
And I've gotten to the point where I will say, I will give you everything you need. I will direct you to the schools that have done it. I will help you with anything if you will write it up, if you will agree to write it up, because we have to share this information. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels. I mean, I think we're probably honestly looking at 20 years of accommodating disabled learners in various ways, with maybe 5 case reports. You know that people have done way more than that.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I haven't published anything in this space.
Let's go. Jen Arnold, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for?
Let's do it. Yeah.
I'm going to text you at 4:30 a.m. and say, have you written this yet? What's going on? Or no, I'll text you at 4:30 a.m. and say, I bet you can't write an article.
In 3 days, right? You're going to put me on the time slot. Like, I need that. I need deadlines.
I'm just going to keep telling you can't do it, because then you'll not only do it,
yes,
you'll overachieve.
That's right. Yes. You got to tell me I can't. You're absolutely right. Oh my gosh. You've already gotten into my psyche. Yes. Now I'm like, oh yeah, you would definitely get to me if you told me that.
Yeah. I wouldn't do that because I'm a nice person, but I am like the biggest cheerleader for anybody that wants to do something that adds to the literature and teaches us all, and breaks down stereotype, right?
Yes.
If we can say, oh, no, this has been done, this isn't a big deal, right? Bringing Walmart back into the loop, and just in case they want to sponsor us.
Yes.
It literally, I mean, I used to go, Ace Hardware is another good sponsor too. I used to go down to the hardware store. I have that mentality, right? Like, I can figure this out. And I would go down to the hardware store and get different things to use with my students. And I would order things for people with arthritis. I'm like, half of that stuff, right? That helps you grip, that helps you cut, like half of that stuff can be adapted to medicine.
Yes.
And we would just use that. And then when I would need to change something, I would just MacGyver it. Yeah.
Yeah. We tinker with things. Yeah. No, I mean, I was telling you about my lone step stool that I took all around with me in medical school, which I still have, by the way, because the company Costco, by the way, if you're listening, doesn't make the best one anymore. They stopped making my favorite step stool. And I have to tell you, I'm so angry. Like, Pittsburgh bought me like 70 of them for the whole hospital, 2 hospitals. And like, I left them all there. And then I went to my next job and they no longer made it. And I had no idea. And I was like, if I had known, I would have like scooped up all of my step stools from Pittsburgh. But yeah, no. My dad took these wheels that you would just, screwdriver and put them on the sides of the bottom of the step stool, so that when you folded it together, because it clasped really easy, and then they had the handlebar, it would just roll with me. So I have to carry it.
Yep.
Like, super easy.
Super easy.
Yeah. And then, but the wheels were underneath, like a lot of commercially available stools, and you had to put your weight on it to step on it. And then people were worried about you falling and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, this is perfect. Like, it wheels, but it doesn't have a wheel underneath you.
Yeah. Well, you can take 4 months to go through a process, for procurement and all of that stuff and requests, or you can go down to Walmart and buy a $10 step stool.
And you're all set. Yep.
And just fight the system.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think I would love to explore that. But, I honestly, the other thing about writing, I just wanted to also add that I don't think I ever would have thought that my experience in the adaptations that I've done just to practice medicine would have been right worthy. Like, do you know what I mean?
I think that you writing up your experience and kind of operationalizing this would have been something to empower students is through the literature, through publicizing these things or publicizing guides.
That is so valuable. I mean, because you're right. Like I've had growing up or in my years practicing, like people call me, how did you do this? How did you do that? Like, where did you find gloves? Where did you find this? Like, I'd love it to be better, but like, at least I could share how I did it.
Yeah. And now you can order specialized gloves, right? Like we have people who are missing digits. We have people who are missing hands, and you can order different things that you need that are specialized. We've come a long way. And I just always worry about, the institution that's not on the cutting edge or that's not connected to the kind of the mechanisms or the resources, getting that information, knowing it, and not sending a message to a student, oh, we can't do anything about that. Yeah. Or what's more frequent is putting the onus on the student to come up with a solution. Yep. But the student's never been to medical school.
I know. How are you supposed to know? Well, that's why when they ask me, how am I going to crack open the chest of an MBA victim? How am I supposed to know how to do that? I haven't gone to medical school yet.
Question is let's just call that question what it was. Like, yes. Who's going to actually do that in medical school?
Yes.
Zero. No one. If you are cracking open the chest of a patient as a medical student, something went seriously, seriously wrong. Yep. It's probably on Grey's Anatomy. Like It's not even, it's not even in the, it's just ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
But they go to the extremes. What's going to happen if, I had one school that was like, everybody has to perform CPR. And I was like, effectively? Well, of course, effectively. I said, well, you have a lot of big men in this city and a lot of tiny medical students, and I'm not sure they have the actual force to save this person.
Yep.
So let's actually talk about apples and apples and,
Well, I mean, research has shown even in pediatrics that only 11% of the time do we give actual effective CPR in a coast. 11%. That's sad, but true.
It's not automated.
Oh yeah, defibrillators and CPR chest compressors. Yeah, exactly. There's tools, like you said, that one, which is fabulous. And obviously I've seen it in action in my SimHAP because we teach so much CPR, and it's like, it's better than we are.
Yeah.
Regardless of your ability.
So I always feel like any opportunity where someone's listening is an opportunity to send a message out, right? So whether that's to the student or to the system with some advice, the things that you think are kind of the most important in thinking about a career in medicine as a person with a disability. So I'll let you have the last word.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Just want to say I've enjoyed this conversation and I've learned a lot and shared a lot, and hopefully I didn't ruin your podcast viewership or listenership because of the randomness of the conversation.
If anybody's ruined it, it's me. I woke up in such a punchy mood this morning. I think I'm just so tired, and we're just so real with each other.
I'm with you. And it's Friday. So like, come on, it's been a long week for both of us. Okay. So my advice, I think my advice would be, and this is something that ironically I've heard from my own surgeon when I was going into medical school. And it's something that literally this morning, because I'm dealing with something at work that my husband had to remind me of. And then he, smiling, winkling said, does that sound familiar? And I was like, great, yes, got it. Our lived experience and our compassion and our fortitude for wanting to care for others and make a difference is what's most important. And so we can't forget that. And when the pressures, the institutional, the ableism, and everything else tries to shut us down or make us feel less than, that's when we need to remember that we bring more to the table than that brings to us, than the barriers that we're facing. So we've got to keep centered with why we are doing what we're doing.
That is probably the most perfect ending ever. I love it. And it's so true. So to everyone listening with a disability, forging through the educational pathway, you are so needed. You are so valuable. We want you here, and keep focused.
That's right. Keep doing what you're doing. You're making a difference, like you said, regardless of whether or not you even feel it or know it. Your patients will benefit from what you give them.
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure. As
Thank
always, I'm excited to see you and the Sim Lab sometime in October.
Yes.
I'm going to invite myself while I'm there.
Yeah, you just tell me when you're ready. Come on over. I'm here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to our guest, Dr. Arnold, for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us today. We are so grateful for your insight on disability education and practitioner accommodation. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. We hope you subscribe to our podcast and tune in next time. This podcast is a production of the Docs with Disabilities Initiative and is supported in part by the University of Michigan Medical School Department of Family Medicine M-Disability Initiative, the Stanford Medicine Alliance for Disability Inclusion and Equity, and the Ford Foundation. The opinions on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the hosts, their respective institutions, or the funders. This podcast is released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivative License. This episode was produced by Lisa Meeks and Gabe Abrams with support from our audio editor, Jacob Feeman.